Bob Ruley, the town planner, review the findings of the preliminary review committee, which took place on September 10th. We reviewed the plan at that point, and Bob is going to give us the salient points of that review and our recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman stated, on the 10th of September, the technical review committee met to review this project. The committee was made up of the chairman, Mr. Massey, our fire chief, James Souza, the building officials office, Andrew Glines from Fuss and O'Neill, and myself. As we all know, tonight this applicant is proposing major expansion of their shipbuilding operations at their Water Street location. While the technical review board did not take up the matter of height or mass, that is better left to the planning board and the town council as part of the zoning amendment and zoning ordinance amendment. The concerns that came out of the TRC, and these have been shared with the applicant and their counsel and consultants, is we do not feel at this point we have sufficient information regarding stormwater and drainage analysis. We don't have any square footage in terms of the buildings. This is a very tight site. There is no opportunity for subsurface drainage mitigation. So that is one thing that we are looking for additional information on. I shared that request with Mr. Tights last week. I understand that we're not going to have it in a matter of days, but I do want it on the record that it's something that we need to look at in greater detail moving forward. An additional concern is from the fire chief with respect to access to the site. This is going to be very tight when it's built out. The chief wants to make sure that he has proper access to get to the rear of the property from Shipyard Lane. The drawings and plans we've been provided to date do not allow him to sufficiently make a determination if he has the proper radiuses for him to get equipment in. Another concern that he has is if the project was approved as submitted, the 55-foot building and the telephone and electrical lines that are on the west side of Water Street would make it difficult for him to get a ladder from Water Street on a truck over to the rear of the building. So something we want to make sure that, again, we're dealing with is the travel lift. Where would that be left at the end of the day? Just again, to make sure that the fire department and emergency services have proper access. Additionally, the checklist requires a traffic impact analysis. The applicant had asked for a waiver from this. We feel that given the amount of activity that happens at Town Beach and Burrisville Park in the summer, that it would be absolutely necessary for us to have a traffic study. Additionally, anticipating the additional work that might happen if this expansion is approved, there'd be additional deliveries and employees. So we would want to see that too. Understanding again that this is at the master plan level, but we think it's important as we go through the process that we have that information earlier than later. I know that Attorney Spears is here tonight and wants to raise an issue with respect to a procedural issue. Attorney Spears and I spoke earlier today. I spoke with the solicitor after Mr. Spears and I spoke, and I won't speak for Attorney Spears, but the solicitor has advised us that a concern was that we have this master plan in front of us before a zoning amendment or zoning ordinance amendment has been approved. And I think Mr. Spears will articulate what his position is, but the solicitor feels that it's appropriate at the master plan stage for us to at least listen to the presentation, that we will be more informed whenever an application is made to the town council for the ordinance and map amendment. And then what the town council will do is refer this back to the planning board for an advisory opinion. And at that time, we can take up whether or not we accept the language that's in the proposed ordinance and the zoning map amendment, and then refer that back to the town council. So I think it would be appropriate right now, Mr. Chairman, for Mr. Spears to at least be on the record with respect to what his concerns are.
Yeah, Attorney Spears, if you could come to the front.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Rulli. Appreciate the opportunity to step up here before the applicant starts to make a few points on the record. I believe that the application is procedurally flawed because it's inconsistent with the process that is set forth in the regulations of the town, which establish that when an applicant wants to receive a zone change and a land development master plan process, the way the process is supposed to start is the zoning amendment is to be filed with the town council. That sets the zone language in the process for amendment. The town council then makes a motion to refer the zoning amendment to the planning board. The planning board then has a hearing on the zoning amendment to determine whether or not the board is going to make a favorable recommendation to the town council. That matter is not before you this evening. You do not have anything on your agenda, and it hasn't been noticed for open meetings purposes that you have an opportunity to discuss the zoning amendment. Once the zoning amendment is referred to you, then you can hear the zoning amendment presentation and get a full picture of what this zoning amendment is all about. You can get all of the details, the specifics, the impacts, understand why they want to do things, how it affects the surrounding properties, how they came up with the numbers and the setbacks and everything. Really sketch it out for you to have a good understanding of what the zoning amendment is all about. The state law and the town regulations also provide that the applicant can simultaneously, at that hearing, have their master plan application joined with it. The benefit of that is that you will get the benefit of all of the zoning information at the same time that the master plan application is engaged with you, so that you can get a full, broad overview of what the project is all about. As this sits procedurally now, you will be unable, in my opinion, under the law, to vote on this master plan application. And the reason is that it would be impossible for you to make the required findings as to whether this master plan application is consistent with the comprehensive plan of the community and consistent with the zoning regulations of the community, because there's been no finding that the zoning language, which is the basis for the master plan approval, has been approved or is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And likewise, if the zoning ordinance is not approved by you as something that you find favorable, you don't have the zoning framework upon which to make a finding in the master plan application that the master plan application is consistent with the zone change that they're proposing. So I think procedurally the matter is flawed, and I think that there's a lot of common sense in the way that the state in enabling legislation set this up. And it's not only for your benefit, but it's for the benefit of the town planning staff and for the benefit of the community, so that everything can be put on the table at once. And the zoning side of this case, which is much more significant in the long-term view of the community, should be given preeminence before this board entertains the applicant's desires and their wish list for what they want to do with the property. So I'm here to suggest to you this evening, to be consistent with the law, the regulations, and the procedures of the town, that the applicant should get this zoning amendment filed with the town council and say that this is the amendment we want, this is the amendment we're going to put our master plan in for, and get that locked in stone. Right now, there's no zoning amendment proposed. They haven't proposed anything. They just attached one to their application that says, this is what it looks like, but it hasn't been put forth as a proposal yet. So I think there's a lot of logic in not starting this process with the master plan. Start it with zoning, get the zoning in place, get it locked in with the town council, refer it to this board, and then allow them to do everything they want to do this evening after they've made their presentation to you, filled you in and educated you on everything that the zoning amendment will do to the community and how it interfaces with their application.
Mr. Spears, would you agree that the presentation tonight of the project without the planning board taking any vote on the master plan. Would you be okay with that?
Well, I don't think they can make a vote on the master plan until the
Right,
zoning
on the application,
application
yes,
is
yes.
so that the matters, at a minimum, understanding that everybody came out this evening, I
I
understand.
mean, there would be, I don't know if we're even gonna get through it tonight,
Yeah.
but I think that listening to what you said, and I'll defer to the solicitor, my assumption is that there would be no vote tonight anyways.
Yeah, I don't think there could be. I think procedurally, you shouldn't even hear it, but I'll leave that to your discretion. But it's certainly that no vote should be taken on the master plan until that zoning amendment is filed and it's referred back here for a hearing, a public hearing on the zoning ordinance. And then at that time, you'll pick this back up.
We did look at that and consulted with the town solicitor, and he indicated that we would still go through with the presentation, but again, without a vote.
Ben, you want to expound on that, please?
So I would respectfully.
You can take your mask off for a moment.
I would respectfully disagree. I think procedurally that the board can have a public meeting tonight. The statute is very clear and town law is very clear that both things can happen at the same time. So I think procedurally, they're okay to hold this public hearing.
But not to have a vote on.
Correct. Again, I don't even know if we're gonna have time to go through the entire public hearing. However, even if we had an approval, it'd be a conditional approval.
Right.
Conditioned on approval such as a zoning map change or a type of relief from the zoning board, et cetera. So at the very least, it'd be conditional approval. But however, I would say not to vote tonight and just let the process take place.
Well, I'm going to leave my objection on the record, and I'll leave the board to its discretion.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Mr. Admin, the floor is
Given
yours.
that, Paul, are you leading the charge or Amy? Okay.
Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good
Well, you
evening.
think we've had problems with it?
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Chair, members of the board, my name is Amy Goins. I'm an attorney with Ursillo, Tights and Rich in Providence, here representing the applicant, Blount Boats, as applicant, also representing both Blount Realty and Water Street Dock Company as joint owners of all the relevant property. For the record, those lots are as listed on the agenda. Assessors Plat 6, lots 4, 11, 25, 93, 99, 101, 107, 108, 109, 111, and 114. I should also note that on some assessors maps, a lot 110 is pictured. Based on our research, that lot has been merged with 109, but in any event, I should mention it. First, I'd like to introduce the development team here with me tonight and also joined on Zoom. Marcia Blount, the president and CFO of Blount Boats. Paul Adaman, architect with Union Studio. Benjamin Cato, professional engineer with Millstone Engineering. Kevin Alverson, landscape architect. And Nate Kelly, AICP, principal planner with Horsley Witten. Also with us, not in person, but via Zoom, is Julie Blount, executive vice president of Blount Boats, Luther Blount, project engineer, and Andy Tights of Ursillo, Tights and Rich. So I want to confirm for the record that all members have received the package, exhibits A, B, and C, full-size plans, exhibit D, packet of drawings, excuse me, from Union Studio, the booklet with the application and amended checklist, table of contents, exhibits E through O in response to the checklist. I also will momentarily enter as exhibits resumes of Mr. Adaman, Mr. Cato, and Mr. Alverson, as well as a hard copy of the updated presentation, which we're about to display. There is no change to the substantive slides from Exhibit D, with the exception of the addition of a few slides on the history and operations of Blount Shipyard. I will, in a moment, address the procedural issue, but let me get into just giving an overview of why we're here. Right now, Blount is operating as a use permitted by special permit under the Waterfront Zoning District. That means that every time Blount needs to do something substantial on its campus, expand a building, construct a new building, it needs to go back to the zoning board for approval for a new special use permit. That's not good for Blount or the town. It would be much better for Blount If we had a master plan laying out our intended growth and development for the next decade. And it would also be better for the town in terms of long-range planning, because then the town would better be able to plan for Blount's growth and have some confidence that this employer, which provides good blue-collar jobs with benefits and anchors the Warren working waterfront, will continue to thrive for at least the next decade and hopefully on into mid-century. So we are proposing and requesting your approval of a phased master plan. And so first we're here before the planning board, and the next step is the town council. We're seeking a zoning ordinance text amendment and a map amendment that will change the zone of the subject property from waterfront to a new zone called industrial shipyard waterfront for the lots west of Water Street where the shipyard is located, and from R6 residence to ISW for the 2 lots east of Water Street. The zoning text amendment, which we'll get into, but I understand may not be getting into in depth tonight, will create the industrial shipyard waterfront zoning district. And the only use that will be permitted in that district is an industrial shipyard. And the zoning ordinance amendment as drafted specifies that any development within the ISW district requires major land development project approval by the planning board. So at some point, the board it will be asked to find those zoning amendments consistent with the comprehensive plan and recommend passage to the council. So I'll pause here to note that we do agree with your solicitor's advice on the process. I think Blount did everything right in this case. We proposed the master plan application with concurrently with the zoning ordinance amendment. That's consistent with state law. And I'll cite section 452361B of the Development Review Act, which is the precedence of approval statute. And that provides that where an applicant requires both approval from the planning board and approval from the town council for a zoning ordinance or map change, the applicant shall first obtain an advisory recommendation on the zone change from the planning board, as well as conditional planning board approval for the first approval stage of the proposed project, which may be simultaneous, then obtain a conditional zoning change from the council, and then return to the planning board for subsequent required approvals. So we had anticipated a multi-step process beginning with the planning board. Again, master plan approval, as well as a recommendation on the proposed zoning amendments, then the council's ultimate approval of the zoning ordinance, followed by a return trip and several return trips, in fact, before the planning board for preliminary approval of the subsequent stages of this phased expansion, which we'll get into. I also want to cite section 452451 of the Zoning Enabling Act, which specifies the procedure required by state law for amendment of a zoning ordinance. And that states in part that where a proposal for adoption, amendment, or repeal of a zoning ordinance or map is made, I'm sorry that I started reading from the wrong section. It says, immediately upon receipt of a proposal for a zoning amendment, the officer or agency that's responsible for receiving proposals for a zone change shall refer the proposal to the city or town council and to the planning board of the city or town for study and recommendation. So I'm not quite sure what the procedural objection is. Of course, if we made any errors in our application, we'll clear those up. My position tonight is that we, again, did everything right, complying with the statute. I can understand the applicant's position on the Open Meetings Act, however, so I would also request that you defer consideration of that item, the zoning ordinance recommendation, to a subsequent meeting. I think we have plenty to talk about here tonight. And so with that, I should also note, we are also proposing an administrative subdivision so that these number of lots can be laid out in a way that better matches what's presently on the ground on Water Street. Some of the existing lot lines run through buildings, and changing them to 9 new lots that logically relate to the operations of the shipyard. So again, that's administrative. There are 9 lots west of Water Street currently. We're just proposing to reconfigure those. That's not something that requires approval by the board, but since it's part of the plan for development, we thought it made sense to bring it before you, and that's reflected as set forth on Exhibit B. So first, I would like to have Marcia Blount, please, give you an overview of Blount Boats and the general plan for the company's continued growth.
Thank you, Amy, and good evening, Chairman Massey, committee members, and town officials. Can everyone see? This is a little awkward. So I'm going to give you a little history, a little context to why we're here. As you can see, we are celebrating our 71st year in the business of building boats. And the Blount Shipyard is located on a 6-acre site that has been in the Blount family for over 100 years. 6 acres is actually a small size for a shipyard, but we are a family rooted in the Warren community, and so we have specialized in smaller, shallow draft commercial vessels. We currently employ about 50 highly skilled craftsmen. Many have been with us for their entire years, 20, even 30 years. Our prior yard manager, who retired last year, was with us for 47 years. My father, you can see a great picture of him, Luther Blount. He passed away in 2006. The second generation, his 5 children, including myself, have been managing the shipyard for 14 years. We have built over 50 vessels during that time. We believe he would be proud of us. You can see that's my father on the first vessel that he built. It was called the Rody Oyster. You can see it is 55-gallon drums welded together. That was his creative side. And what he was doing there in 1949 was removing a mountain of clamshells from Blount Seafood's parking lot at the request of the town. So during our 71 years in business, we have built a total of 372 vessels. And we design and build all types and sizes. You'll see passenger vessels, car ferries, harbor tugs, fishing boats, dinner boats, and on the upper left corner, Miss Liberty is still running in New York Harbor from the Battery to the statue. And I was on that delivery trip in 1954. So Blount boats last. So now you can see the vessel in the lower right is the Atlantic Pioneer, delivered in 2016. She was the first U.S. flagged crew transfer vessel ever built in the United States. And she transports maintenance crews to and from the 5 turbines on the Block Island Wind Farm, now owned by Ørsted. And you can see the vessel in the upper left-hand corner is what we view as our future. That is a Chartwell designed crew transfer vessel currently under construction with a launch date in early November. And she will transport crews to the turbines on the Dominion projects off Virginia. So we anticipate building and maintaining fleets of these aluminum catamarans for the wind farms. And to produce 4 to 5 boats a year, we will need to do 2 things. First, we will need to double our yard workforce. We most often hire young men and women right out of high school and develop their skill sets over many years. So they become expert fitters, welders, machinists, pipe fitters, carpenters, marine electricians. We provide good-paying jobs with excellent benefits. Second, to produce 4 to 5 boats a year, we will also need to create more covered fabrication space. And those are the buildings you're going to see. So you cannot build aluminum structures in the weather outside. For that matter, gone are the days when we can expect our workforce to even build our steel vessels in the rain and the snow. So 5 years ago, we were granted permission to build a tent over the waves. And we used the tent to fit together the hulls and deck houses of about 15 60-foot aluminum crew boats, which were built off-site, actually. The tent provided covered space, but the tent is not a fabrication space. It has no insulation, no heat, and no overhead cranes. We built it to EPA guidelines with explosion-proof lights and filtered ventilation so that it could become our EPA-approved paint shop. So Rhode Island is called the Ocean State. The state's Economic Development and Planning Council has approved a plan which focuses on the emerging blue economy, meaning any economic activity linked to the ocean, such as offshore wind, tourism, and the marine industries. We have been awarded a site readiness grant from Commerce Rhode Island to specifically develop this master plan in order to meet the high demand for crew transfer vessels on the wind farms. Blount Boats is part of a developing Rhode Island-based offshore wind supply chain. The blue economy offers promising new domestic industries right off our coastline. So thank you very much for that. And then we'll go on to our presentation with Paul Adam.
Mr. Rulli, I'd like to submit some materials for the record, the resumes that I referred to earlier, as well as hard copies of the presentation.
Mr. Chairman, council has provided a resume for Paul Adelman, which will accept as Exhibit A resume for Benjamin Cato, which will accept as Exhibit B, and for Kevin Alberson, which we will accept as Exhibit C.
Again,
So we'll
do we need to
A.
accept those formally in a motion?
No, I think that's, you know.
Okay.
Is this different than what we've got before? Okay, and then the Exhibit B1 is a copy of the presentation that they're doing tonight.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, everyone, members of the board, and the public. My name is Paul Atman. I'm a senior associate with Union Studio Architecture and Community Design. I'm also a resident of Warren. Thank you for your time tonight. My goal here is to give you an overview of the phase plan development that Blount Boats is proposing, and also then focus a little bit more on the phase one section of the more immediate development and improvements that they have in mind. Everyone, I think, is very familiar with the site. It is here in Warren, along the Warren River, right before it branches to the Barrington and Palmer Rivers, north end of the Narragansett Bay. On a large area along Water Street, you can see the 6-acre site lies on the water.
Paul, I just asked that you pull the mic closer or use the mic.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry.
It's okay.
Ready?
I'll just get closer. Okay, is this better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And people are very familiar with the site. It's on Water Street, bound on the south side by the town beach, the South Mooring Field, Burris Hill Park across the way, St. Mary's right here, and then right immediately to the north is the wastewater treatment plant that is recently gone under extensive renovations. It is in a flood zone, just like most of the waterfront in Warren. It's an AE zone. Right here, you can see the extent of it up and down the river on both sides, in Barrington and in Warren. Many people know the site by driving by it on Water Street. Can you hear me now? Okay. Along here, this is Water Street, looking south toward the town beach. The west side of the road is Blount Boats. This here is a storage building. This here is the offices of Boat Line Ventures, the boat cruise line, Blount Boats, and then the South Hull shop. This here is that office building that we are proposing to improve. This here is a view on Water Street in the corner of Campbell Street looking north. South of the Hull shop is an existing steel frame structure that was built years ago for one of the early boats. It's defunct now and really just used as storage. That'll be coming down. This here is a view of the South Hull shop right up against the sidewalk with a shed roof off the south end. This here, I'm sorry, this is a little dark. It's taken against the sun, but this is the west side facing the river and is on the inboard portion of the site. Many of you board members joined us in March in the first weeks of COVID for a site visit. So we did a nice walkthrough of the site and then gathered in the South Hull shop to view some of these drawings in the pre-app process. I'd like to spend a couple minutes talking about area shipyards in New England that exist in harmony in historic fabrics. They're large shipyards that share a main street with residential uses right on the other side and residential neighborhoods. And further down the street would be a downtown core. This here's Bath Iron Works. All these slides are Bath Iron Works in Bath, Maine. You can see this aerial photo of the waterfront here, the residential neighborhoods across the street, and then the downtown core at the crossing of the bridge. This here's a view of the hull shops and the fabrication and all the operations that are on the water side of the water side of the site. Here you can see a tall building along the side of the road, right opposite one of the residential buildings. This here's a marina in Falmouth, Massachusetts. Again, large hull shops and marina uses right along a main street with residential and a downtown core nearby. Another one is Front Street Shipyard in Bethel, Maine. Here is the extent of the shipyard, and right across the way, residential and mixed-use commercial downtown historic core. A large ship lift at the Front Street Shipyard. And then I'm showing a few sort of industrial buildings that show sort of the mass and form that you'll be seeing later in the presentation. The existing site, this is a plan of the 6 acres west of Water Street and the 2 lots on the east side of Water Street that are also part of the presentation and the development plan. The North Hull shop is the largest building here. The offices building is here along Water Street. South Hull shop is here. There's a small single family residence on the south end of the shop, the site, with layout area, storage and parking that's currently being used next to the town beach. And then another it's a mixed residence building here. This is Mr. Blount's old house, and there's 2 or 3 apartments in there. And the telescoping tent that Marsha talked about earlier at the center of the site. So the phase master plan is broken into 4 major components. The first one is the light green, and we've broken it down to 3 sub-phases. The reason for that is it sort of allows the Blount Boats to start on immediate improvements in phase 1A on the very south end of the 6-acre site. And that would entail a vegetative buffer along the town beach property line, Water Street around the single family house, and then also integrated into the next phases, real street improvements along Water Street. And it's the intention of Brown Boats to really make this bottom of Water Street much more pedestrian friendly and attractive and pleasing for a lot of people that are coming up and down Water Street to Burris Hill Park and the town beach from the residential and neighborhoods and downtown, the historic downtown. Phase 1B would entail improving the existing offices. We'll look at those proposed improvements a little later, along with some street improvements. Then the final third subphase of phase 1 is the renovation of the north bay of the South Hull Shop. I should point out that the main South Hull Shop is anticipated to be constructed early in phase 1A. Phase 2 moves us toward the water, where we have the telescoping tent. And with this phase, the intent is to improve and repair these 2 long and large piers and repair this bulkhead and fill in the spillway that the telescoping tent right now covers. And the reason for that is Blount Boats is buying a large travel lift, which can travel over the water, lift the vessels up out of the water that they will be servicing in the future and move them around the site. And the reason for that bulkhead improvement is so that they can make that travel lift can operate between the full extent of the telescoping tent and the edge of the water. Phase 3 is looking at further improving the bulkhead and the stone pier here where the current cruise lines are docked. It's in need of repair and stabilization. So their intent is to then continue the improvements along the water on the south end of the piers. And then finally, down the line, this is the long-term range plan, is to construct another hull shop here by taking down the 3 residences of that Mr. Blount had built years ago. And this would be a 100 by 100, just approximately a 12,000 square foot hull shop to continue servicing their contracts with for the Chartwell vessels and other vessels too. So I wanted to spend a few minutes on the travel lift and introduce you to how it operates. Here's an image of what that travel lift looks like and how it rolls out over the pier, how it lifts up a large vessel. And this arrow diagrams its maneuverability within the site. Once a boat is taken out of the water and brought out onto the pier, it's put onto these rollers, and then it can be rolled easily into the hull shop because this travel lift will not fit into the buildings. And that way, these boats can be maneuvered much more nimbly around the site. And the same goes true once a boat is done and fabricated, it would get rolled out on these rollers, and the opposite would happen. It would get transferred to a travel lift. The travel lift would bring it out to the pier and drop the boat into the water. Here's a little bit of an enlarged plan showing this technical drawing of this travel lift going out over the pier and being able to maneuver left and right past the telescoping tent and the reconstructed bulkhead. The existing buildings, there's many on the site. There's the telescoping tent that you're aware of and we've been talking about. That tops out about 45 feet. The existing north hull shop also is about 45, 46 feet. The existing south hull shop is just about 30 feet in height. And then the small office building is about 25 to 28 feet. I can't see them from here, 28. Yeah. And I wanted to point that out because if you look at the rest of Warren and especially the Water Street and some of the historic core, there's a lot of buildings that share those building heights. At the very north end of Water Street is everyone knows the American Tourister Mill that's been redeveloped into residences and commercial buildings, commercial space. And up to the clear story that you don't see here, it's 60 feet. Closer by, which I always call the Best in the Bay building, is 325, 327 Water Street, which is at 40 feet. And I'd like to point out how close that is to the sidewalk. Next door is the wastewater treatment plant. Their offices are at 33.5 feet. And then Blount Fine Foods, again, right along the sidewalk, is at 32 feet and 2.5 stories high. Those are all on these red dots here, and then Blount Boats here at the south end of Water Street. The proposed zoning, which we won't dwell on too much, but this is a diagram showing the setbacks and the building heights that are considered to be part of the dimensional criteria of the zone district. And what it does is it helps establish and anticipate buffers 15 feet from the south property line. One would have to go respect that before the building height of 35 feet is allowed. And then further back 70 feet until 55 feet height of building height is allowed. On the Water Street side, where we have the new district, the ISW district, for the two parcels on the east side of Water Street, you can see that that 35 feet high could come up to the street level, most likely not on the east side. But this is also on the west side where the existing Hull shop currently stands, and it is at that 30-foot height. Once it steps back 15 feet, one is allowed to build up to 55 feet. The South Hull shop improvements is the first phase. So what I'd like to show you here is this diagram here shows the existing Hull shop as it stands now. The red dashed line shows the extent of what will be demolished. There's one bay on the north side that will remain, and then everything to the south will be reconstructed with a new addition. It'll provide two 50-foot wide bays for their Chartwell vessels. In plan, you can see that the existing facade is up on the property line. There's a 5-foot setback before it returns another 15 feet on the very south end of the building. And I'll show you that, you'll see that and be able to visualize that a little better in 3-dimensional renderings. If you take a cross section through this new Hull shop, this section is taken east to west. Here's Water Street. Let's say you're taking the section east to west and you're facing north. Here's Water Street on the right, with the right of way, with the sidewalk, the property line, and the setback of the small 2-story bump out before it reaches up to 55 feet. As you can see from this diagram, that this height is essential. Marshall will be able to answer more specific questions as well about the fabrication, but this is a scale model of the profile of the boat that will be built in this Hull shop. It has to be set up off the ground. Then as you layer in the hull, the bridge, and the top of the boat, you can see that there's about 6 feet before the crane, at the bottom of the crane. There's a large hook there that maneuvers material and components for the workers. And that is the base minimum what the building can be. If we're to do a pitched roof, which we are proposing, we're proposing to have solar panels facing south to provide electricity to the facility. And the bottom of the crane is 35.5 feet. To the spring point of the roof line is nearly 45 feet. And then with a 3 and 12 pitch, we're up to 55 feet. This was, as you know, reviewed and approved and recommended by the Warren Voluntary Historic District Commission. They are very supportive of the design, the massing, and the proposal. This here's a section now, a north to south section looking east. No, sorry, looking west with the, like, point cameras here, with the existing bay of the hull shop here and the new 2 bays proposed to the south of it.
Can I ask you one question, just since we're on this slide? Can you just point out the existing heights of this building as they are now? I don't
Yes.
think they're pointed out on the
It
diagram.
is right here.
Okay.
And I think you'll see it in the next few slides here. This here is the Water Street elevation. This here is the existing North Bay hull shop that will remain. There's 2 little I should say, masses that respect that height, and they're set back 5 feet. You can see the shadow line here from the north. And then behind this alignment of roofs, behind them, 15 feet from the property line, is the main hull shop at 55 feet. This here is the south elevation. Water Street is here on the right-hand side with the property line, right aligned with the far north end of the existing bay. This line here is the 2 new lower bays set back 5 feet, and then 15 feet back until we hit 55 feet. This barn door is operable for access to and around the boats when they're inside the building. I'm going to go backwards for one moment, because I wanted to show you that these barn doors are fixed. They are not operable. There's one right now in the existing North Bay that, when open, it poses a hazard to the employees and public when kids and others walk in thinking they can walk into a fabrication shop and look around. And so it's become a real problem. And so their intent is to block off any access from the public along Water Street, but we will render it as much more human scale with fixed barn doors and then tall windows up above as a clear story, both in the lower volumes and as well as the large volume. You can see the solar panels on the south roof line. Moving over to the west, this is the river side. These are the large barn doors for each of the south bays, and then the existing north bay that will be renovated. Again, there's solar panels on the south and the intermediate middle roof plane. Then the final elevation of the hull shop is the north elevation, showing restoration and reskinning and restoration of the north facade with the building the new hull shop addition toward the back. It's very important for the Blount to provide a lot of fresh air, light, and solar power for their operations to reduce costs and also improve their employment and workspace for their employees. This now is the office building up here on the left-hand side, upper right.
Just a minute, before you go to the office building, in the new boat sheds, you've got them at a 55-foot height, and you've noted that that's necessary for building these crew delivery boats. I'm assuming there may be other boats that are built there. Is this a size or a height that is typical for boat sheds in other operations? Or is this built specifically for these particular kind of boats? Marsha, I guess, could cover.
No, I would say they're actually smaller than a lot of the boats we build. So in every boat you can see there's an underwater portion and that you don't realize, when you're looking at a boat on the water. So we, in the vessels, for instance, we built in the past year, we have built, a governor's island, which is actually got a 50, it was 54 inches high so it was even higher than what we're asking for. And in that case, we had to build the deck house separately, and we actually had to put it on the water. So, excuse me? 55 feet, did I say?
No worries.
I tried to make it smaller.
Inch to the foot.
Yes. So clearly, we believe that this is the size that we're going to be building the most of, but we just delivered a 56-foot tug to New York State Power Authority, and she was much smaller. But then, as I said, we had the Governor's Island, which was 54 feet tall, and we had to build the deck house separately. For these catamarans, you can see they're aluminum hulled catamarans. Their height from the cradle, because we have to lift them up on the cradle as well, off the floor, to be able to ultimately move them, to the height of their mast is 47 feet. So a lot of times we're stuck with either building pilot houses separately or masts separately, and even the masts on these crew transfer vessels are about 16 feet and loaded with electronics, including radar, antennae, horns, lights, which involve a lot of marine electrical work, which is much better inside than outside, and much better not having to do it out on the lift dock or in the water. So to get to your question on size of vessel, we can build smaller, and obviously which would fit easily into these buildings. The catamarans, which we think we're going to be building a lot of, we made the 55 to fit, but we also have the capacity, we have the skill set to build much, much larger boats than we could ever build on our site. But we can go up to about 150 feet, and we can go up to about 55 feet. But in that case, if we were to win that kind of a bid, we would be building the deck houses separately, but we prefer not to.
Yeah, essentially, I was looking at the utility long-term for a variety of different constructions.
Yes, that's right. And we anticipate, steel as well as aluminum. But as I said, nowadays, and the reason for all the covered spaces, you can't expect your workforce and your clients will not, permit your vessel to be built outside. And a lot of these vessels are in classed societies, either ABS or DNV coming over from Europe, and they demand that they're built inside.
Right. Thank you.
Well, yes.
On the Water Street elevation, can you go back to that, please? Can you speak into the mic? On the Water Street elevation, yeah, no. That one.
Yes.
Now, you pointed out a shadow line on the right, that one. Over to the left, you have another shadow line near the. Now, now go to the next elevation. That implies to me that there's 3 setbacks there.
That's correct.
This one doesn't show it. This one just shows one structure setback.
This here is that first
Yes.
facade that you mentioned. This here is the second one, and then this is the third. And I think
So
you're looking on it.
Okay, so
this
you-
elevation
okay, so
straight
you
on.
use that as the line, the vertical line. Okay, I guess.
Yes, the vertical.
Thank you.
I guess we kept the shadow in coming from one direction.
Yeah.
So that would all be in shadow. So you can't see the setback, but you'll see it in the rendering, 3D rendering.
That vertical line was not,
Visible.
well, it was difficult to interpret.
Okay. Thank you. We'll scroll back to the existing offices that will be renovated. There we go. And so there's no significant changes in massing or scale. It's all cosmetic to really make this a much more attractive building for the workers and the public, and especially people coming up and down Water Street. There's new clapboards and windows. That windows are rendered as large barn doors that have been infilled. There's a new canopy over the entrance. Stairs, metal stairs will be repainted, and then landscaping will be improved both on the north end entrance and on the south end with potted plants to really define the entrances. And Kevin will talk about that a little bit more later. He's the landscape architect. Material imagery, this is what we showed to the Historic Voluntary District Commission, and they were very supportive of the proposed uses of material that are very sympathetic and contextual with the historic downtown fabric, as well as boatyard architecture and industrial architecture and industrial materials. I think this here is a nice image of the existing streetscape here that is in a panoramic, stitched together photos, and what is proposed in its place. I would point out that please don't get caught up on the scale, because the photography of this, the scale of this seems to be as big as the 55 feet high of the proposed. It's just, it's a scale difference from where we, vantage point of where we took the photo. But you can see how the streetscape is really starting to come together and be much improved, both by architecture and by materials, massing, and on the streetscape, the various plantings that I talked about and site improvements for entrances into the office building here and here, a buffer of parking with a vegetative edge, and then along the front of the South Hull shop. And then I'll leave you with these three images, which Mr. Jeffers, you'll see here. It's sort of a step back of the North Bay to this one, and then back to the blue mass. There was some concern also about what if this was all built out with the phase 4 building being the exact same dimensions as the two bays that we're proposing in phase 1, what impact it might have on the town beach. This is a rendering of a view right from the lifeguard chair. And with the vegetative buffer that Kevin will talk about, you can see that this building is set back pretty far, and it is still at 55 feet, would be the permitted height according to the new zone ordinance. And then a bird's eye view of the proposed improvements showing the north buildings, the office buildings, the South Hull shop, the North Hull shop, the telescoping tent, and then the phase 4 building, if built out in 8 to 10 years' time, perhaps. I don't want to put a timetable to it, but that's about the time frame that we're looking at. So,
Paul, could you please go back to, maybe it's the slide that begins with the travel lift, but what the site plan looks like, at least for phase 1. Could you go back to that slide, please?
Okay. That'll be
It's
quite a ways back.
Yeah, I understand that. Maybe go.
This one?
Yeah, so I mean, I just want to reiterate the concerns that the fire chief has in terms of the massing, not the size or height, but just the number of buildings and structures that are behind what we see from Water Street and his concerns with respect to access and public safety. And again, I reiterate if it was approved, whether or not he could be able to get a ladder at a proper angle from the street. And the second piece that, and again, I just want to say this to the planning board, is that this is all for the most part hard surfaces, and the stormwater management of this is going to be difficult at best. And I want to make sure that we're focused on that early on in the process. In my memo to the planning board, what I've suggested is in terms of, I know that you're looking at the FEMA maps for flood. My suggestion would be when we did the upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant, we were using the NOAA maps and storm tools. And the flooding is a constant issue, or stormwater is a constant issue in this area. So I would just encourage you to perhaps use that as your modeling for flood. It's more accurate, and I think that at the end of the day, we want to be in a better position. So just want to reiterate that for the plan.
Thank you, Bob. I think Ben Cato will talk a little bit about the fire access. But what I'd like to point out is there's a couple of entrances to the site. One is, the first one's a north entrance. One is the middle entrance, let's say. And then the south, the Shipyard Lane entrance. And there's actually another entrance here, let's say the very south. So there's 4 access points. But to your point, Bob, if this is built out, this becomes a tight corner. We're proposing that Shipyard Lane actually gets pushed south a little bit to better align with Campbell Street. And that'll give us a little bit more of a turning radius, maybe not for a ladder truck, but currently the large 18-wheelers make their delivery entering and exiting around the existing office building.
The fire chief is concerned that not just getting on the Shipyard Lane, if you had to get into the site itself.
Yeah.
That, I would just suggest that you have a conversation with them early on.
I agree. Yep. Agreed. So I'll zip back to the end of my presentation and hand it off to Ben Cato, who's the civil engineer. We'll talk a little bit more about, or maybe Amy first.
No, thank you. I'll just take my. Mr. Rulli, did we get a copy of your memo?
I did, I will be.
Thank you. Okay, as long as we get it at some point. Yes, Ben Cato will address the engineering details.
One quick question. In your bird's eye view, you're not showing the eastern side of the property with the residents and the existing residents that's on that.
Here, this here's the existing parking lot.
Yeah.
South of the residence, the existing house. Here's Long Wharf Lane. We didn't show it because at the time of the rendering, we're not proposing any changes to that single family residence. We're proposing improvements to the parking lot.
You were going, was that included in the shipyard, industrial shipyard zone though?
Yes,
Okay, so that parking lot and the existing residence would be an extension of the
new zone.
that zone.
Yes, correct.
I
And I
thought there
think
was an
Ben-
existing house that was being demolished as part of phase 2C.
Perhaps.
Okay, okay.
Because it all depends, I think, well,
Yeah, okay.
Mark will be able to say what the parking needs are for the work production flow.
That is the
and
one
growth.
that's right to the bottom of that.
Right here.
Okay,
And that, I think that is a last effort if parking is needed in the future.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking for the mic.
I have a question. Yes, you have a mic.
Just to clarify, if development were to be proposed at some point in the future to the east of Water Street, we would be required to come before the board seeking an amendment to the phase master plan. So that's not shown on the plan at this time.
just to be clear, right now, the phase 2C does say that there's demolition or relocation of an existing house. So just, that's what my plan is. No, on the east.
Can somebody give Mr. Patterson a, oh, okay. Mr. Patterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question I have is, when we listened to the initial presentation about the shipyard and its growth plans, you now have approximately 45 to 50 employees at the shipyard. Over time, hopefully, that workforce will grow. And some of the estimates I guess I've seen are to 100 people. Is the parking that you have now in this off-site or across the street lot, as well as the parking alongside the office building, going to be adequate to support that additional workforce?
This is Paul again. Could we proceed to the civil engineer's testimony? And then, because I think he's going to address some of the parking and other things.
Sure.
I think to move the presentation
Okay.
along and then come back to
All right.
more specific
Is
questions.
that okay with you, Jim? All
Okay,
right.
thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, can you hear me? Do I need this one? My name is Benjamin Cato. I'm a registered professional engineer with Millstone Engineering in Warwick, Rhode Island. And just bear with me as I get to the slides that pertain to my field. Oh, there we go. So the first thing I wanted to show, just for the record, is this is an existing site plan. It shows the buildings that are currently on site as well as the current lot configurations. And, okay, just wanted to get familiar, I apologize. So this is an existing site plan that shows the area of the site west of Water Street in existing condition. This sheet here, which shows the existing conditions east of Water Street. So there's two lots across the street that are part of this overall development plan. I just wanted to show them so that you can kind of get a feel for where they are. But the real plans that I wanted to speak to were first this one. This is the proposed administrative subdivision plan. And as mentioned earlier in this presentation, there are 9 lots recognized by the assessor on the west side of Water Street. And we're proposing to reconfigure those lots, maintaining 9 lots so that they work better with the existing buildings and the proposed buildings that you've seen in testimony already this evening. So again, there's 9 lots to begin with, 9 lots. In the end, there's no expansion of the physical property as part of this project. Everything is taking place within the properties currently controlled by Brown Boats. This is the site plan, which shows in a smaller scale the overall west side of Water Street and east side of Water Street together on one sheet. So everything that Paul spoke to earlier is located here on this, the western side. You have the existing hull shop, you have the office buildings in this area over here, and then you have the proposed expansion of the south hull shop here, and you have phases 3 and 4 here. And this plan is, at the master plan stage, is meant to convey conceptually how we intend to deal with site issues such as stormwater and parking. And I wanted to tackle parking first, if I could. Right now, as Marcia mentioned, there's approximately 50 employees that are on site working on the boats. And in addition, there are multiple residences on the properties. And when we looked at the parking, we wanted to figure out a way that we can maintain the required parking for the existing employees and for the residences, and then also provide parking for the future build out of all phases. So what we've done is we've shown that we can park per the town code all of the proposed commercial development, including the renovated office space, the expanded hull shop, the new hull shop, the new office building down here in phases 3 and 4 at the same time, while maintaining residences that are on the property. And just because, to make it simple, we kept all residences, even residences that may have to be demolished or will have to be demolished depending on where they are, as part of the development. So we took a basically worst case scenario and said, if we had all the houses, all the apartments, and all of the commercial uses going on at the same time, can we afford the space to park those vehicles? And we have shown that on this plan with the reconfigured parking as part of phase 1 adjacent to the office space. So we have parking right along here. We have parking on Water Street where there is currently parking today, but it's going to be with the new enhancements to the facade of the building and landscape improvements. It's going to be a more defined parking versus pedestrian area along the frontage of those office buildings. And we also show on the north side of the office some parking here. And then we have future expanded parking in the lots east of Water Street. And just to show how much room is actually on these properties on the east side of Water Street. We provide 50 spaces on this one lot that will more than accommodate the additional 50 employees that Braun intends or expects to have on hand at the very end of this build out. So we feel we can adequately park for this facility in these areas here. And that leaves additional space should we need more parking or should we be required to handle stormwater in different areas throughout the site. Notably the lot with the existing house on it here, and then the lot that's adjacent to the town beach. So as far as parking is concerned, we feel as though we have all of the required parking. And these parking calculations, which we use, which were one parking space per 2 employees, which is in the zoning ordinance, and is essentially what actually happens on the site. So the calculation is working today, and we're projecting that calculation out in the future as well. So we think it's an accurate calculation, and we provide 2 spaces for every residence that requires it. So in total, we have 60 spaces provided, and again, that is for the worst case scenario. Perhaps I shouldn't say worst, but for the ultimate build out, including facilities that may or may not be in existence at the end of this build out. 60 spaces required, 60 spaces provided. As far as stormwater, for the master plan stage, we show an area over here in front of the South Hull shop that we can use for water quality treatment. And we asked in our application for a waiver of stormwater at this time. And what we meant by that was, because it's master plan stage, we didn't want to have the full drainage design to come before you. And so we have a preliminary plan where it's more appropriate for the hard engineering work to be completed. So for this particular phase, we focused on the South Hull shop phase and show where we could have some water quality in this area over here. Most of the areas that we're proposing to develop are currently impervious surfaces. So when we have impervious surfaces in existing condition and we're proposing an impervious surface in a proposed condition, you don't see an increase in runoff. So the stormwater detention basins that you might see on projects where they're developing in wooded areas are not something that is necessarily required. Another thing is under the stormwater guidelines, the Rhode Island Stormwater Design and Installation Standards Manual, which we will be following, we have to follow for any development at this size in the state of Rhode Island. Also, we will be working in concert with Coastal Resources Management Council. So we will be abiding by following the rules of stormwater for the state. But a lot of these areas that we're proposing to develop would be considered what's called a redevelopment site. And in redevelopment sites, the state understands that you're not taking raw land and making it something that's impervious. And so you have a little leeway in how you treat and how you store runoff in those scenarios. And those are the regulations that we intend to abide by and we'll be utilizing for our stormwater design.
May I just interrupt you for a moment? I understand that you're at master plan. We had an application 2 nights ago where we have identified what we think is the issue. We do not want to defer discussing that to the preliminary stage or to final. We are concerned enough with stormwater that we do not want to defer the conversation with respect to how that is going to be treated. You've got over 10,000 square feet of potentially impervious surface area that under the state guidelines you're going to have to deal with. So my recommendation to the planning board is that we're not going to grant you a waiver to defer stormwater. We want to engage on that conversation now. We have stormwater flooding issues in that area now, and the amount of roof that you're creating on impervious surface area for the traveler, et cetera, is something that we want to address now. So I don't expect you to address it tonight, but we do not want to defer this to the next day. We want to have a conversation about that now as we go forward.
Sure, and we can work with the town on that. Absolutely. I wanted to touch on a few other things that were brought up at the technical review and earlier tonight even. We mentioned fire department access, and this is obviously something that we will have to be working with the fire department on in numerous aspects, both from access and fire protection as well. The chief had mentioned that perhaps a hydrant would be required internal to the site, and my client has no issue whatsoever with extending water onto the site, putting additional hydrants on where the chief thinks it's necessary. We do have hydrants on Water Street in 2 locations across the street. They're on the east side and the shoulder. But again, if the fire department requires more, then the applicant is more than willing to do that. And then we can sit with the fire department and discuss actual access routes. We feel as though there is room to, in the expanded Shipyard Lane that Paul spoke of, to get apparatus in. We also have accessibility in a lot that's just to the north of the town beach, in addition to the existing curb cuts around the site. But we want to make sure that the fire department is on board with this completely, so we will be working with them to do that. And then traffic was mentioned earlier, and we understand that there's a 50% increase or 100% increase of employees proposed as part of this development over 10 years. And the first phases of this development, which is the office space renovation, we're not anticipating a significant increase in employees at this time. Now, that being said, we understand that the town is looking for a traffic statement. We just need to work with the town as to when, if that's something that can be on down the line, or if we need that at the same time as we're doing the master plan here. But we are talking with.
I think we would like to have that earlier than later. I mean, understanding that the office is first, but prior to getting too deep into the approval process, I think it's important for the planning board and the public to understand what the traffic and potential impacts are going to be.
And we're working and putting that together. I think that hits all of my talking points. If there's questions for me at this point, I'm here to answer them. Otherwise, I'm around if you want to move on to the next presentation. Seeing none, I'll hand it over to Kevin, I believe, right?
Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Right? Good evening. My name is Kevin Albertson. I'm a registered landscape architect in the state of Rhode Island. My offices are in Whitford. I was brought on to the project team to, in particular, look at buffering conditions. Here's a conceptual plan that we put together, but to look at some buffering conditions, particularly along the southern border of the complex, where it's abutting the town beach as well as the back beach area and playground area, to address sort of the scale of the building and also just soften that edge between. In addition, working with the project team to improve the streetscape along Water Street to provide that more pedestrian feel that Paul had referred to earlier. What I did to get started in the project, I performed a few different site visits out there to kind of look at the existing conditions of the vegetation that are in that neighborhood. In particular, the area at the town beach, and to look at some of the species that are there so we can have some consistency with the vegetation, but also look and see what was doing well and what wasn't doing well, particularly along this sort of difficult landscaping condition that is along the Warren River. What we found was certain trees that they're doing well, certain trees not doing well, whether it be from overtopping of flooding, storm surges, just coastal breezes. So what we found, though, that there were some native plants that were growing very well out there. So we tried to address that with the landscape design for this project. Of course, at this master plan stage, this is a conceptual landscape plan. We certainly look to have more detail, at further points along the project, and including working with Ben Cato, the project engineer, on any sort of stormwater planting designs that may be needed for water quality. Also, as the parking area that's along the eastern side of Water Street that Ben had referred to earlier, Mr. Cato, for that expanded parking. When and if that does occur, we would certainly be following the town's guidance on landscape ordinance to provide the proper shading, buffering, et cetera, for that component of it. But just to give you a quick run through of the planting scheme of what we're looking to do as it gets built out. Again, there's another pointer. Here we go. Along that southern border of the project's campus, there's the existing gravel parking area that's there that will stay as part of this overall master plan. But what we're proposing, there's an existing chain link fence, sort of dilapidated, that's along that area that provides just some pedestrian security and safety between the town beach and playground area and the campus. What we're proposing is a landscape buffer along that entire southern border, ranging between 6 and 10 to even up to 15 feet at certain areas of the buffer. But the majority of that will be between that 6 and 10 foot range right along the southern border. And we're planting that with an array of deciduous, being trees that drop their leaves, and evergreen trees, as well as some native grasses and some native shrubs, again, deciduous and evergreen along that area, to create not a green wall, but to create something that has a little bit more character to it that actually works with the existing vegetation that's out there. So we use a lot of similar plants, not all the same plants, but there's, for example, there's some native trees out there. There are tulip trees that are out there that are in the town beach park area. There are some columnar varieties of those. We propose using some of those in that area, some white oak, which also is in the playground area that's doing well out there, and then some native cedars to give that evergreen. So you had seen in Mr. Adam's presentation earlier some of the renderings that we put together along with his group that show that buffer range at maturity will be anywhere between 30 to 45 feet in height. The thought being that when you're sitting down in the town beach area or in the playground area, your view perspective, if you can envision that, is going to sort of take the scale of the buildings that full build out would have along that property border. We also are proposing, mainly just for practicality purposes, along the western end of the existing gravel parking area, again near that future phase 4 Hull Shop area where Mr. Blunt's house, former home, I suppose, is. We're proposing some native switchgrasses and little blue stem, things that are good coastal perennial plants right at the top of that existing bluff that goes down. That's just in order to help, again, maintain and protect the top of that slope for overtopping that happens in storm surges. That's just more of a practical thing. It's not really going to be seen necessarily by the public unless you're out in the water, but it will also give a little bit of greenery to that edge of the gravel parking area that doesn't exist right now. In a nutshell, that's the direction that we're looking to go with the landscape design. Again, further detail would be presented in compliance with the town's landscape ordinances at that preliminary stage. But are there any questions from the board at this point? Nope. Okay.
Bob, just for the record, individuals that are speaking out providing resumes, correct, and get the necklace exhibits.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
This is Amy Goins again. The last witness for Blount is Mr. Nate Kelly. I apologize for not bringing hard copies of his report. Email copy was provided to Mr. Rowley and to Attorney Spear on Monday. We will have hard copies for the board upon our return. But Mr. Kelly will speak now, and his resume is included in that report.
We'll accept his resume as
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members of the board. So is this mic okay, or should I use the handheld? Are you hearing me okay?
You just identify yourself.
My name is Nate Kelly. I work with the Horsley Witten Group. I'm a principal working there for 20 years now. And I run our Providence office and direct all of our planning work, some of which has included policy and regulatory reform for places like the Port of Galilee, Quonset, and the Providence Working Waterfronts. So my charge on this project was to provide my opinion about the proposal, both the master plan and the zoning in its current form, the proposed zoning relative to the comprehensive plan, consistency with the comprehensive plan, and also looking at the state guide plan framework. So to begin sort of at that high altitude level, the statewide level, what we found looking through the state guide plan is that the most relevant plan they have now is called Rhode Island Rising, which is the state's economic development plan. And one of the central goals of that plan is to look at playing to the strengths of Rhode Island. So I believe the third goal, sort of overarching goal in that document, is that the state should look to play to its strengths. And part of that is a discussion of working waterfronts. So the state guide plan sets out a couple of strategies that are very relevant to the type of operation that we're looking at now. And it's worth just going through these very quickly. Just for the record, the state plan says that they would, the state should, these are actions for the state, provide guidance to host communities on how to retain areas with infrastructure for waterfront industry in the face of market pressures for alternative use, such as resort and hotel and residential, acknowledging that working waterfronts are under pressure often to convert to what may be the current strong market at the time. Very often we've seen that happen in other communities where they switch over to residential. And once you lose your working waterfront, you don't get it back. That's really, it's kind of like farmland in that respect. So it's important to try to be proactive about retaining that. The state plan also asks the state to explore ways to further capitalize on Rhode Island's strengths in boat building, including additional uses for that industry's composite materials and the manufacturing skills of its workforce. So really setting the stage for the topic that we're talking about tonight. Moving from the state plan, we look to what you all have on your books for your comprehensive plan. It's really the seminal document that sets policy for land use and regulatory reform and all of those things moving forward. And on the, as you are probably aware, as members of the planning board, the future land use plan, as it's called in your document, and what the state calls the future land use map, interchangeable phrase, identifies this area as the waterfront area. And there's some great language in there that sort of sets the policy framework for this area and shows a lot of strong support for a working waterfront environment. And so in the economic development elements, your economic development elements, it opens with this quote, local strategies can capitalize on the town maintaining and enhancing its maritime and agrarian heritage, waterfront properties, natural resources, and sense of place. So sort of at that, again, at that high policy level, this acknowledgement of maritime use, working waterfronts is important to the heritage here. We also noted in that document that there is reference to another planning document that is important to this, or the town's policy framework. And this is, the name of that plan is a waterfront development plan for Warren, Rhode Island. Was developed by the Urban Design Group. And that's still on your website. And I think we may have actually brought a couple of hard copies with us if anybody wanted to see that. But we excerpted from that plan as well. And I'll read quickly for you. The core of the waterfront should be maintained and anchored by water-dependent uses, supplemented by related uses. However, the present mixed-use character that imbues the waterfront with its special uniqueness and charm should also be encouraged. The town needs to develop marketing strategies to foster and encourage such uses. These might include small boat yards, repair facilities, yacht brokers, and ship chandlers, as well as support services for boat charters and recreational boaters. So much of that obviously is relevant to Blount And we think that that language really sets a strong platform for you to think about, you know, a master plan that deals with looking at maritime industry and long-term viability, and also regulatory changes that would support that. So at that level, I think it's, to my opinion, it seems pretty clear that the types of uses that are being proposed for the Brown Shipyard continually are consistent with the framework. From that issue, we looked further into the plan, and those sort of broad policy statements eventually translate into goals and actions. So policy number 7 in your document states that the town will ensure that any development or redevelopment of the Warren waterfront enhances, not detract from its character as a mixed-use working waterfront. And so the key word there that we're honing in on is character. So what is the character of this area, and will it be enhanced? So this area, I think for 71 years, I think it was mentioned, has been sort of industrial shipyard. And has continued to evolve and respond to market changes and industry changes over time. So the types of improvements that you see here are just really meant to strengthen that. So what we see with the landscaping, with the architectural treatments, I think it's pretty clear to us that from a character perspective, this development proposal, this 4-phase proposal, is really going to strengthen that character, not only from a business perspective, an industrial viability perspective, but from the experience of somebody on the street, you know, walking through this area and seeing brand new landscaping, brand new fencing, new siding, new roofing, expanded buildings, new construction. It's really, from a character perspective, I think is going to be something very positive for the area. And then lastly, I just wanted to sort of echo, I think Paul Adaman, Mr. Adaman, in his testimony, really went over all of the details that deal with the scale issue. So there are several buildings in the area that serve as sort of larger structure anchors that he talked about, and those range from 32 to 40 feet. And so with the proposal that you see before you, the conceptual proposal on the zoning, on the streets and on the residential property lines, 35 feet. So that's matching sort of that scale where you have, and the step backs are meant to reduce that visual impact and that feeling that would otherwise be very imposing for that area. And the zoning also includes, beyond that step back, requirements for facade articulation with the windows and the bump outs and the recesses and all of these treatments that are really meant to soften that and reduce the impact of that scale. So we think that the scale on the street is consistent with the area because it's consistent with the character and the historic construction. And we think that the standards for step backs and articulation are only going to enhance that further. So our opinion is that from the perspective of sort of heritage and economic viability and economic goals for the town, this is completely consistent with your comprehensive plan. And then in terms of the character and the scale, I also think it's consistent with that. So I would entertain any questions that you might have.
Thank you. The inclusion of residential buildings, you know, particularly the one along Water Street, from an aesthetic standpoint, it makes for a really nice streetscape. But calling this zone an industrial shipyard zone and then including residential buildings within that, from a planning standpoint, gives me pause. Your feeling about that? I mean, we're talking about a fairly high action industrial area, and then a teeth of residential buildings within that area.
Is that the supported residential that you're talking about in terms of the?
There's 2 residences that exist on the west side and one on the east side.
Yep.
That are included within this industrial section. And again, it gives me pause. Not that I don't see, again, from a street standpoint,
Right.
looks really nice, but moving forward, it does seem a little troubling to have a residence within an industrial area.
Right.
Your
Well,
thoughts?
I think that this is unique. I mean, Paul showed some of the other areas, some of the other shipyards where you have some blending of this, and this is definitely an issue that we've wrestled with. So when we worked on the Providence Working Waterfront, for example, which is obviously a very different scale, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not hotels and things like that should be allowed in this area. And our conclusion there was that it wasn't appropriate because of the issue of scale. You know, the types of operations and the trucking and the scrap keep, you know, that is yay high off of that area is not going to be compatible with that. I do think that Warren is different. I think that the eclectic nature of this street is, I don't know that there's anything like it elsewhere in Rhode Island. Is there really? Maybe Newport?
No, I mean, but also nothing in what we saw with other shipyards was there residential included in them. Bath, you know, the John Brown Engineering.
Mr. Chairman.
Again, it's not a matter of, you know, a holdup. It's just the nature of the presentation is such that residential seems out of place.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I think the advantage of having the hearing tonight and having the planning board ultimately having an opportunity to look at the language of the zoning ordinance, it gives the opportunity to the planning board, if you do not think that those residential properties should be included in this proposed zone, then it's appropriate for the planning board to make that recommendation to the town council.
Yeah, I was asking the witness though for his opinion based on, you know, his experience. You know, and I understand what you're saying. I mean, compared to Providence, a very different animal.
I do think it's an issue of scale, and then you all will look at the issues around traffic and those types of things that are going to be of concern to residents. But, you know, I do really think it's an issue of scale.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies on record.
Anything else? All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And thank you all for the presentations on the engineering, landscaping, and overall design. Appreciate the attention to detail. And Marcia, the history as well. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I'd like to take just a few minutes. I'd like to take just a few minutes to preview for the board what I think we'll get into in more detail at a future meeting with respect to the zoning ordinance amendment, because of course it's tied to this master plan that's before you. I think you'll be in a better position perhaps at the next meeting to get into it. But your question, Mr. Massey, regarding the pre-existing residential uses, it's spelled out that pre-existing residential uses shall be allowed to remain as a permitted use. If it would allay any concerns about future growth or future expansion of the residences shown on the plan and proposed to be included within the ISW district, we could add language clarifying that expansion of the existing residences would not be permitted. But I just want to encourage the board to review Exhibit O, which is the proposed text of the zoning ordinance amendment. I will, for time, I will skip over a little bit of the prefatory sections, although I would like to note the statement in 32-176. I think we can all agree the continued growth and prosperity of boat manufacturers is of primary importance to the future of the town of Warren. And that's the assumption upon which this whole project is predicated. It's important not only for Blount to be permitted to expand because remaining status quo isn't an option. The demand for their services and their talent is there. Blount needs to rise to the occasion. It's not a scenario of let's make a wish list and if you build it, they'll come. The demand is there and Blount needs to adapt to changing times as it has, again, 71 years. This plan, I think, balances growth with respect for the historic residential context. But going on to what's in the zoning ordinance amendment, again, it states that all development within the district shall be reviewed as a major land development project. The only permitted use would be that of an industrial shipyard land development project. There's some language in there regarding permitted uses that are accessory to that. But then really on section 32-180, you have A through G, and that's the nitty gritty of the zoning ordinance amendment. That's where it specifies requirements for setbacks, height, lot frontage, coverage, facades, buffering, and parking. Now, I think where we are today, we would meet the requirements necessary under state law and under your ordinance. We would satisfy the standards for a special use permit, as well as for any variances that would be required. Clearly, there's a hardship with the existing site, the existing buildings. Clearly, there's a need. There's more than an inconvenience to Blount and their workers to maneuver on the existing buildings as they're laid out now and at the sizes they're at now. But I think it's important for the board to understand long-range planning. Again, the present situation of having to appear before the zoning board every time a new building is built is just not ideal. It's far from ideal for Blount, and it's not ideal for the town either. So again, I think we came to you with the understanding that this master plan, the phased master plan application before you is at a very high level. We'll be back before you a total of 4 times for 4 preliminary for approval on 4 phases. And it's there, I think, that we'll get into those details on drainage, traffic, and other subjects which are typically appropriate for preliminary level of review. So what I'm suggesting is that we've come to you with quite a long-range plan. As you can see, a diverse set of both expansion of existing buildings and new construction. I think the level of detail, of overall detail in that can be balanced out by getting into more detail at each subsequent phase of approval. I'll reserve the right, if I can, to provide comments after Mr. Spear and any interested parties offer comments. I would ask Mr. Rulli to note for the record, and the board to acknowledge, you did receive several items of correspondence in support of this application. I'm aware you also received some correspondence of objectors as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Goins.
So, and to Mrs. Goins' point, and I've provided recently the copy of the correspondence that's been received to both Mr. Tights and to Attorney Goins. So with her permission, and I would like to introduce those as exhibits. We have 11 pieces of correspondence that have been received. I would like to introduce those as exhibits C1 through C11, if she's in agreement. There was an email from Kathleen Sullivan. There was an email from Susan Lima. There is a letter from Stephen Pryor, who is the State Secretary of Commerce. There is a letter from Margaret Carrera at 26 Hill Street. There is a letter from Jan Retzma. There is a letter from Andy Aruda. There is a letter from Harold Beaker. There was a letter that I believe you all received individually, but I also got a dear blank letter from Pauline Maston. There was an email from Ken Patterson. There is a letter from the East Bay Chamber of Commerce. And there is a letter from Charles Tateman. I won't say whether they were in favor or not. They were provided to all board members as well as council and all the
on that matter, Mr. Rulli, moving forward, when someone has support or objection to an application, and in this case, this one in particular, a procedure should be to send it to your attention for distribution to the planning board, as opposed to sending it to the individual members of the planning
That
board.
would be preferred. I know that you did get one letter that was addressed to all of you individually from Ms. Massett, but in the future.
From the standpoint of the board, that makes it more consistent and ensures that it is entered as evidence, as opposed to, I got one, for example, from someone and it didn't have any, not words on it, except for a PDF. And in these days, you don't open a PDF from somebody without an explanation. So please be aware of that when submitting testimony, that it's in your best interest, either for or against, for it to go to Mr. Rulli, so it's ensured that it goes to every member of the planning board.
So your preference, how you want to continue, whether you want to hold public comment to the next meeting, or you want to start that tonight, or if there are concerns or comments that members of the board want to express before we get to that stage.
I'd like to hear from the members of the board first. And I'm not sure that it, given the fact that we've decided not to vote on the master plan at this point, it would seem to me that it would be more appropriate for testimony to come at the time when we are actually going to vote on this from the public. But if someone has a burning desire, I'm also open to that. But before we get there, anything from the planning board, questions, concerns, comments regarding the presentation? Jim Lefferts.
Do we know what the proposed boundaries are for the ISW? Is it just a 6-acre site and the 2 lots across the street, or is it?
Yes, this is Amy Goins. The proposed boundaries for the ISW district are the lots noted on the agenda. It would only be the property that's subject to this application. Any subsequent amendment to that, and I'm not saying that there is one plan because there's not at that time, but as you know, zoning ordinances subject to amendment at any point in time, but that would require approval by the council.
Hi there, Jane Miller. I guess I want to just say that I agree with Attorney Spears' point that we're would be in a hard place to actually make a decision on the master plan as it exists now with what our zoning is on the books. However, I also want to say that I think seeing this presentation was pretty critical to understanding what that proposed zoning is. It's not important. It doesn't matter to me whether or not we get public comment tonight or at another future meeting, but the public comment for me is going to be really critical to understand this proposed zoning, because I think that the major concerns that we're getting from abutters and other residents, obviously has to do with scale and massing of the site and density of the site. And that is kind of the bulk of what we're looking at with this proposed zoning change. So I think that will be really helpful for us to actually understand the passage of and recommendation ultimately of this to the council.
One other thing is when, for example, we were just reviewing another application on a completely different topic, and there are testimony when providing testimony to the planning board, it's most helpful to put it in the context of the kinds of the criteria that we're looking at this process in. In other words, I don't like the look of buildings is not helpful testimony, and it really has no bearing on what we're doing. What needs to happen is it needs to be within the context of the comprehensive plan, the requests that are coming in for the zoning amendment. So it is either supportive of the specific application or in opposition to those elements within the application, because that is where the meat of the matter is. That's how we're looking at it. So and in some cases, there were just either cheers or jeers from the sideline. And frankly, they'll go into the evidence, but they will have little or no impact on decision-making. So I again, ask both sides to consider that when sending something in. Thank you.
Mr. Massey, I would just ask that you poll the remaining members of the board as to whether they have questions or comments, just so we have it on the record.
Andrew?
Good.
Jim?
No comment.
Brett?
No comments.
Tyler?
Thank you.
Jane? Jeff?
Mr. Chair, I would also maybe suggest that considering that this is a public meeting, a public informational meeting, and people are here and they have, I believe, reservation. I'm here in the building that if there's anybody here that has that need to publicly speak today, to give that opportunity, as long as it's limited in nature and reasonable.
Yeah, as I said before, I think, it's, I would limit comment to 3 minutes, but if someone here wants to speak now, there will be opportunity closer to the time when we're making an actual decision. This would be viewed really as a review of the process.
So I just want to add that in addition to people here, there potentially are people that are participating via Zoom that might want to comment as well. So you just balance whether we're going to hear all of that tonight. It's either going to, I recommend it's either all or not.
Well, yeah,
Could we go over just the theoretical next steps for what happens with the zoning amendment, just so that will help us, I think, inform what those future meetings might be that would involve participation?
We have a 90-day clock ticking right now. So that's the big thing, that this board has to make a decision unless the applicant in writing allows us to continue. And I think that they would be open to continue to spread for more public information and et cetera. The complexities associated with this, including filing an application with the town council for that amendment. Once the town council gets that application, it will be forwarded to Bob and to the board for recommendation. So there's definitely a lot of procedural steps that we have to do. However,
And that would technically be a separate public hearing that the planning board advertises for comment and input on that zoning amendment. Is
No,
that true?
that is actually, you're going to give an advisory opinion
To the town.
to the council. So
Okay, thanks.
timeframes in terms of approval, et cetera, public comment, even with the town council. So
Okay.
certainly a lot of timeframes that we have to think about. However, again, today is a public informational meeting.
Amy, when do you anticipate filing your application for the zoning ordinance and map amendment?
Well, as soon as possible, and we thought it had already been filed, and I'm a little, I'd like to clarify.
You would file it. We won't file it for you.
If the solicitor thinks the clock is ticking, that means that we have a properly filed application. The first step for me tomorrow is to determine what was filed and when.
I think the solicitor is talking about the timeline for the planning board to make a decision on the master plan, which is 120 days from the time that the certificate of completeness was signed.
I believe it's 90 days, actually.
It's 120
We
days.
had to permit that we did a couple of days ago.
Is 120.
It's 120, but I believe the town, the general law says 90 days, I believe. I know our town ordinance says 120, but that's certainly something that I would have to examine to see which one, which again, I think we're getting cooperation in terms of making sure.
But nothing has been filed with respect to any zoning amendments or map amendments.
At this point, I think we'd like to move forward to the next meeting, whether it's a regularly scheduled meeting or a special meeting of the planning board, with the clock running as it is on our master plan application.
And I would suggest that that be a special meeting. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is the continuation of Settlers Green. I think to try to couple this with that
I don't see a problem with creating a special meeting. I understand this was a last minute change. I mean, we were coming into here under the assumption that we were having a master plan and a zone amendment.
I would suggest that the council meeting is, there's time to still get that application or request on the agenda for the, it would be the October 13th meeting. for the town council. We would need that by the 6th. Well, actually, I mean, the agendas go out on the 8th, so preferably by the 6th. But I mean, that way, then the council can make the recommendation, refer it back to planning. It might be that planning is going to have 2 special meetings, Settlers Green, and as well as, or if you want to take up the zoning opinion at the Settlers Green meeting, that's for you to decide, but that's all right to decide.
Well, I'll have to see, where the Settlers Green is. There are a number of hanging chads with that other application. So we don't know what the timing is going to be. I think we'll know a little bit more closely to the event, but we're certainly will work to facilitate the process.
If I could make a suggestion, Mr. Chair, as you know, because this is a public hearing, it needs to be continued to a date certain or else it would need to be re-advertised. I might suggest that you continue this to your next regularly scheduled planning board meeting, which I believe is October 26th, with the understanding that in between now and that point in time, we'll confer with the board, of course, on potential dates for a special meeting, so that on October 26th, that special meeting date could be announced, and ideally it would be determined and announced and noticed as far as an agenda even before the 26th. But that would be my suggestion for tonight, unless you want to hash out the scheduling now.
That makes sense to me, and I think it would allow us to continue the meeting, and then we wouldn't go through the entire
Thank you.
witnessing. Okay, Attorney Spear?
Thank you very much. I'm going to respect your position on not opening things up, but I just wanted to say a few things on procedural matters, since that was what I started my conversation with. And for the record, I represent Jane McDougall, who's an abutter across the street. And we will be putting on a robust presentation when we do get into the weeds on the zoning ordinance. And I would prefer to be able to make that presentation to you at the same time that you are considering action on the master plan. So the one thing I don't want to have happen is the master plan application being continued to a new date for a decision to be made on the master plan without having an opportunity for you to hear the hearing on the zoning amendment, which comes to you from the town council.
I would think that we would be able to have your presentation when we're doing the zoning.
That's exactly how I'd like to do it. So I would like to see the matter get to the town council. There will have to be advertising on that because it's a zoning amendment. So I'm not sure if you're going to be able to make the timeline that you suggest, because that's a pretty heavy lift.
In terms of, you go to the council as the application, they're not, the only action the council's going to take is to
Send it back to us.
Right. But there's got to be a completed application for them to act upon it, and that means it's got to be advertised.
no public, it's not going to be a public hearing with the council.
Right. That's correct.
Would do for us.
So my goal is, hopefully, and it sounds like you're in agreement, the application gets filed with the town council refers it to you, gets set down for a special hearing on a request for an advisory recommendation. At that time, you can simultaneously have the master plan hearing at that meeting as well, because the state law provides for contemporaneous hearings on both matters. So that's what I would propose.
And I would suggest, again, with respect to people that appear tonight and online, that all of that public comment happen at that time, because people we're not going to let them speak twice typically.
Right.
And to be consistent, so everyone's on the same page, I think it's better that all of that happens at that same time.
I would agree. Thank you. All right, well, with that in mind, we'll close we're continuing the, I'm sorry.
We're continuing the hearing.
Yeah, we're continuing the hearing with. Yeah, if you step forward. No, I need to pick up the.
I'm Leslie Hartwell, and I live at 17 Campbell Street. So I am very interested in what happens. But I actually don't want to make comments because I have way too many questions about how this whole thing works. And also an article that was in the paper that I read trying to keep up with what all of this means. And I could feel the anxiety level growing as I was reading this because the questions started mounting up. So what I really need to know right now is how do I get my questions answered without taking everybody's time in this kind of a forum? Where would I go to get, right now I'm not ready to make comments because I have too many questions. Where do I go?
Just that you could submit your questions to me.
Okay,
It's appropriate for me to answer them because they are generally related to zoning or land use.
Right.
And
right,
generically, I can answer those.
right.
If they are specific to the project, then it'd be more appropriate for you to ask those questions in continuation of the public hearing. But if you have questions generally about what the existing zoning regulations are or what the planning regulations are, I can answer those.
Okay, because I wasn't sure if I put in a letter, I wasn't sure whether I can expect answers to my questions, if it's okay. I didn't know if there was somebody I go to get questions answered rather than, sending an email thinking that someone's going to even have time to answer my questions.
I try to.
Okay, so I didn't want to assume that.
Yeah, no, and that's fine.
You must work 24 hours a day because I see you.
Yeah,
I see you everywhere.
in Bob's defense, not only does he work 24 hours a day, but he's also very good at answering questions. when
So
people
that's
ask him.
appropriate to
Yes.
ask those kind of
But
questions.
if
and
it's
then-
something that I can't answer, I'm going to tell you. that.
Right.
You can reserve
Okay.
that. So when you're in public forum, you can ask that question.
Good, because I don't feel comfortable having an opinion yet. It's just too many
As we mentioned
questions.
earlier, there are other residents either for the project or against that have submitted comments. The planning board members have all gotten those letters, they've had a chance to read them, council has, they become part of the record for this case. So whatever you submit to us is not ignored. It is.
I wasn't suggesting that. What I just didn't want, I wanted to take the right person's time.
Yeah.
I didn't want to take other people's time. So that's it. Thank you.
That would be Bob.
They don't have-
All right, so we are continuing this, however, I would ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
We're continuing it to.
We're continuing, so we don't adjourn it?
No, I need a motion to continue to the next scheduled
Okay.
meeting.
The October 26th.
All right, a motion to continue this meeting to our next scheduled meeting.
So moved.
Jane, second.
Second.
Jim, all in favor, raise your hands. And that's it.
Yep.
So we don't adjourn.
Now there's a motion.
Now we
Motion to adjourn. Andrea, second. Tyler, all in favor? Thank you very much.